We're still not on. Now we are. There we go. Thank you. That was slick. That was smooth. Okay. Wisdom for living as it concerns the subject of money. And all of us are interested in what God's Word has to say about money. Because unless we decide to move off on some desert island somewhere, away from all people, we're going to have to deal with money, with possessions, and so forth, and other people. So we all need to review this from time to time. Proverbs 38 and 9, if you turn there, that's great. But now we've got a slide, so we can look at that as well. Remove falsehood and lies far from me. Give me neither poverty nor riches. Feed me with the food allotted to me, lest I be full and deny you and say, who is the Lord? Or lest I be poor and steal and profane the name of my God. I won't ask for hands, but how many times have we asked God that in our lives? Go, Lord, don't make me too rich or don't make me too poor. Give me just enough that I can use every bit of it to your glory. Give me enough that I won't be without and do something I ought not. Don't give me so much that I think I can do without you. How many times have we ever prayed something like that? I believe that's a pretty good prayer for us to include in our lives. This is one of my favorite proverbs on this subject right here. As we've gone through, I've mentioned some that I think are maybe more really applicable, meaningful to us specifically than others, but they're all, of course, good and true. This one, I think, really gives us something practical to think about and to pray. If we think about it, if we realize that our souls are the most important thing that we have stewardship of, then the next conclusion is this: I want just enough possessions to help me get to heaven. I don't want to be too poor and do something dishonest. I don't want to be too wealthy and forget that God is my provider and that I need him every day. So this is a very, very powerful, simple proverb to remember, and I believe something that's very proper for us to pray. It has the idea of balance, which is so important in so many subjects that we discuss from God's Word. The idea of not going too far this way or too far that way, and almost always we can recognize somebody that's done that in the world. We talk about any subject, and we find somebody that's gone to an extreme on it. We want to be balanced in the things that we talk about. And the balance here with money or possessions, stuff, it's I want what the Lord will give me to help me please him and live with him one day. So we talk this evening about wisdom and money from select proverbs. I have several proverbs here for us to look at. We probably will not get to all of them, but that's okay. I encourage you, of course, to be reading on it on your own anyway. And we're going to jump, as we have before, beginning with the first part of it, moving all the way numerically through the chapters. There's perhaps other ways you could put them together if you wanted to, but it's pretty difficult. So we're just going to do it this way and talk about what the Bible has to say, or Proverbs has to say about money. Let me mention two observations that I found as I studied this. You see if you think the same thing as you go through it. Two things that I was reminded of and really even surprised of as I read about money scriptures. Two things that Proverbs says a great deal about. One is bribery, and two is being surety for another person's debt. I was just really amazed. I know I've read these before, I've studied them before, I've taught it before, but I was amazed at how much those two things come up over and over in the Proverbs that have to deal with money or with possessions. So see what you think tonight as we go through that. All right, we'll begin in Proverbs chapter 3, verses 9 and 10. Here's what we do with our possessions, with our stuff, with our money that represents stuff. Honor the Lord with your possessions and with the first fruits of all your increase. So your barns will be filled with plenty and your vats will overflow with new wine. Remember, Proverbs are statements of general truth. There are no 100% guarantees because God has given man free will. But here's what happens most of the time. Most of the time, as we are faithful to the Lord in giving back to him, as his people have always done, by sacrifices, by tithes under the Old Testament law, by the law of Moses, under the New Testament as we give to Him of our money and our time, we put the Lord first. We could do a long study on the subject of first fruits from the Old Testament because God made it very clear that that's one of the ways of putting Him first. When you first start getting the produce from the fields, what did God ask for? The first part of it. You go and you give me a sacrifice out of the firstlings of your flock, out of the first of your harvest. And if you do that, God said, I'll take care of you the rest of the way. You won't have to worry. You won't have to wonder, well, I wonder if this will be a good harvest. You know, God didn't want people to sit back and say, well, we'll wait till the barns are full and the stalls are filled with animals. If everything goes well, at the end of the growing season, I'll give God what I think He deserves. God didn't want us doing that. God didn't want them doing that and made it very clear through some of the sacrifices that He established. He wanted them to take the first fruits, the first of the harvest. And God said, if you give me the first fruits, I'll give you a blessing from there on out. And that's what the wise man is reminding us of here, is give God the first. Give God the choice of your increase, that which is produced, that which you take in through the harvest. Don't wait and decide, well, you know, maybe I can or maybe I can't. Your vats will overflow with new wine. They had an interesting way of processing their grapes back then. They'd have two levels. Sometimes it was just grooves in stone. You see pictures of this. You can find them on the internet. And a stone up here and a stone down here. And this one is prepared in such a way as they can throw the grapes in there. And of course, how do they get the juice out of the grapes? They have a grape juicer. Oh, they jumped up and down on them and sang songs while they did. And then the grape juice would pour out of a prepared place on one point, and it would go down into a groove in a stone down below that, gravity fed, and it would go down there, and that was the vat. Your vats will be overflowing. Can you imagine having such a great grape harvest? People up there jumping up and down with their feet, and the grape juice is running down, and you have them say, whoa, slow down, wait a minute. We can't get all of our wine jugs filled up here because you're going too fast. It's just overflowing. We got too many grapes. We got too much wine. That's the picture. That's how God will bless us. If we'll do what? Give Him the first fruits. And so it is today. We don't think of smashing grapes, and we don't think of wheat harvests or barley harvests, but we give God our first. You know, we don't say, well, let's do the budget, and if we've got some left after all the expenses are paid, we'll see what we can do for God. That has never been what God has asked for, and it isn't today. When we make out a budget, you know, first item needs to be deciding what I'm going to give God on the first day of the week out of the way He has blessed me. That's what first fruits are all about. And that's not just an Old Testament subject. Okay, sermonette over. Let's go on. Turning on to Proverbs chapter 6. We're going to look at the first 5 verses here. My son, if you have become surety for your friend, today we would call that co-signing for a loan. Except back then it was not nearly that formal. It was probably just a handshake. The wisdom of God's word says don't do it. You know, people get in trouble when they pledge for somebody else and they really don't know what somebody else is going to do, and they don't really have the wherewithal to cover the loan without causing suffering to themselves and their family. They might even find themselves in servitude to that person because of a debt, because they provided surety. They co-signed for another person's loan. My son, if you become surety for your friend, if you have shaken hands in pledge for a stranger, can you imagine doing that? Somebody you really don't know, but they need to, you know, borrow something, and you say, sure, I'll stand good for that. You know, somebody just drove up out in the parking lot here, you'd never met them before, and need you to co-sign for a loan for me. Would you do that? I really need whatever it is. Would you do that? Well, it's foolishness. Apparently some people didn't know any better because Solomon warns them, you are snared by the words of your mouth. You're taken by the words of your mouth. So do this, my son, and deliver yourself. For you have come into the hand of your friend. Go and humble yourself. Plead with your friend. Give no sleep to your eyes, nor slumber to your eyelids. Deliver yourself like a gazelle from the hand of the hunter. How quickly does a gazelle run from a hunter if he has a chance? Pretty quickly. And a bird from the hand of the fowler. How fast would a bird fly away from someone who's trying to throw a net over them if they could get away? Very quickly. That's Solomon's picture here of a situation in which you shake hands and provide surety for someone, and particularly a stranger. And he says two things. Basically, number one, don't do it. If you've already got yourself into a mess like this quickly go and see if you can get out of it, because it's foolishness. It's not wisdom to be surety like that. Now, what did the law of Moses surety? What did the law of Moses say about a poor person? Were you supposed to give them a loan and charge an exorbitant rate for it? Leviticus chapter 25, verses 35 and 36. We're not going to take time to read them. We won't get to all the Proverbs. Basically, it says, don't do that. Do not charge interest. Do not give a loan to the poor people. Instead, let them move in with you. Take care of them. Let your house be their house. Do not charge them interest. Do not take advantage of them. That was the idea. So giving loans and giving surety, especially for people that were struggling, that was not wise. Continuing on, the rich man's wealth is his strong city. The destruction of the poor is their poverty. What does that say? That says that wealth does have its advantages. There is nothing inherently wrong with riches, is there? What is the root of all evil? Is it money, or is it the love of money? Which one did Paul say to Timothy? It is the love of money. There is not an inherent evil with money. There is inherent evil in the way men think about money many times, and the way they want money, and the way they just have to have money. They can't think about other things, and sometimes they do evil to get money. That's what's wrong with money. But there's advantages, because the rich man's wealth is sometimes like a strong city. It can protect him. It can get him out of difficult situations. The poor man now, destruction of the poor is their poverty. Poverty takes a toll on them because they cannot get out of certain situations because they do not have the resources to do that with. So there is an advantage to money, but right along with that, we read warning after warning, and certainly many more warnings than we have reassurances that money can be valuable. You know, it's like God knows we'll figure that out on our own, but he really needs to remind us that it's dangerous too. We've got to be careful. All right, chapter 11, I put them on a couple to a slide here as far as they would go. Riches do not profit in the day of wrath, but righteousness delivers from death. The day of wrath there is thought to be something like the day of the Lord coming in judgment, such as times when the northern kingdom was taken into Assyrian captivity, times like when the Babylonians came and took the southern kingdom away into captivity. Whenever God's wrath was activated, came to be by the punishment of his people when they were wicked. The answer is, when you're rich and the Babylonians come to Jerusalem, what good's that going to do you? That would be a for instance. What good did it do the rich people? You know, sometimes that's one of the first ones to go, right? They lose all they have, and their house is burned, and then they're taken off to captivity. If anybody's left, like in Samaria, you know, what was left of the Jews there? The folks that didn't have very much, the poor folks. And then the Syrians brought other people in, and there was an intermarriage, and that's where the Samaritans came from. You know, riches in the day of wrath, when God is allowing people to be punished because they're evil, such as these cases in the Old Testament, money was really a burden more than an advantage, no profit. But righteousness delivers from death. If people are righteous, there won't even be a day of wrath, will there? If God's people had been faithful Would Assyria have come? Would Babylon have come? Would Rome have done the things that Rome did? If God's people were always righteous. Righteousness delivers from death, whether we're talking about spiritual death. In particular, in these cases, I think he had more in line the idea of physical death and destruction. Okay, here's that surety again, the co-signing, the shaking of hands for somebody else's loan. He who is surety for a stranger will suffer, but one who hates being surety is secure. You see, you can't get yourself in trouble for a co-signing that you didn't do. You're safe. You're off the hook. But being a surety for a stranger can cause a great deal of grief. A gracious woman retains honor, but ruthless men retain riches. And as I recall, people talked a little bit differently about this and exactly what that meant there. I think some translations have strong, which would put kind of a positive context on it. A gracious woman retains honor, and a strong man retains riches, with strong being a positive word. Others translate that word as ruthless, a person who is both strong and wicked, a ruthless person, and who retains riches with a negative concept of retaining, by taking them perhaps by force, misusing them, and so forth. So two different ideas in two adjoining verses there, both of them having to do with riches. Moving on, he who trusts in riches will fall, but the righteous will flourish like foliage, like that tree planted by the waters, where the roots are always nourished, that we read about in Psalms. Well, that's what the righteous will do. But the person who trusts in riches will fall. And it was suggested that word fall is, as you had a number of applications, but one of them could be like dead leaves or dead branches falling from a bush or a tree, because it wasn't nourished. It had no nourishment, and therefore it just dried up and died and fell away. Just as we are in Jesus Christ, he's the vine and we are the branches. If we remain connected to him, we're nourished spiritually. If we're separated, we aren't. Well, the person who trusts in riches is separated from God, because you cannot trust in riches and trust in God at the same time. You'll do one or the other, but it's impossible to do both, because God demands 100% allegiance. So the trusting in riches is like that leaf or that branch falling off and just falling ground dead and dried up. Whereas the righteous, who obviously trust God instead of in riches, will flourish like a bush or a tree that's in full bloom and really doing well. So the difference between trusting in riches and trusting in God there. We continue. Proverbs chapter 13. There is one who makes himself rich, yet has nothing, and the one who makes himself poor, yet has great riches. We'll go ahead and read the other one. I want to talk about the first verse. The ransom of a man's life is his riches, but the poor does not hear rebuke. Let's talk about the first part of that in particular. Does that remind you of any situation in the New Testament? Perhaps the book of Revelation? Does that sound familiar? He who makes himself rich, yet has nothing. He who makes himself poor, but has great riches. That reminds you of a couple of congregations. Ken says he said to Laodicea in Revelation chapter 13, says, you think that you're rich. You think you're wealthy and have need of nothing. But I'm here to tell you that you are miserable and wretched and poor and naked. So they thought they were rich, but they were poor. They just pretended to be rich. Makes himself rich, but has nothing. On the other hand, what did he say to Smyrna? Smyrna was a congregation that apparently was struggling back in chapter 2 of Revelation. He says, I know your works, your tribulation, your poverty, but you are rich. They weren't rich in stuff. They were rich spiritually. That's what John was writing to them. They were rich as far as their spiritual relationship with God. So you can be rich and poor. You can be poor and rich. And the way we want is to be rich in our relationship with God, rich in spiritual things. There's one who makes himself rich, but he really has nothing. Because it's all so fleeting, what he thinks he depends on. The one who makes himself poor can have great riches, like the Christians at Smyrna. Wealth gained by dishonesty will be diminished, but he who gathers by labor will increase. Okay? We remind ourselves that always happens. Do the bad guys seem to get away with it for a long time sometimes? Yes, they do. But in a general sense, a person's dishonesty will catch up with them. Because going along with that dishonesty is generally an attitude of never being satisfied. I don't have enough. I've got to have one more dollar. Some famous man, I've forgotten the quote now, and they asked him how many more dollars do you want to make? He said, one more. Well, that's the person who trusts in riches. And those two things put together, and probably going to catch up with that person someday. You can be dishonest for a while, but eventually it's going to catch up with you. Wealth gained by dishonesty will be diminished. Something will happen eventually. But he who gathers by labor will increase. We're talking about an honest day's work. Okay. A good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children. Passed on, children, grandchildren, all going to be blessed by the hard work of a righteous man. But the wealth of a sinner is stored up for the righteous. How do you suppose that happens? How is the wealth of a sinner stored up for righteous people? Any suggestions there? Okay, so he could lose it that way. Is it possible that there could be a loss by the sinner of those things, and it winds up in the hands of just people? We can envision situations like that. We don't have time to talk about a lot of them, but we can envision that, where eventually, it's not in his hands anymore. It winds up with people who are going to use it for a good cause. Solomon says that's something that can happen. That you don't even wind up with it at the end. But the righteous man, the good man, right on down one generation after another, just like his righteousness. All right, 3 here from chapter 15. I think maybe even more after that in a moment. In the house of the righteous there is much treasure, but in the revenue of the wicked there is trouble. Okay? The word revenue there means the produce or the product. What comes from effort, what comes from labor, what comes from one's behavior. So the righteous, the product is treasure, like a storeroom, possessions to encourage. But the product, the produce of the wicked life is trouble. And that's not the way wicked sometimes see it. Wicked want to think, well, as long as I get it, doesn't matter how I get it, I'll have it. But that's not treasure. Better is a little with the fear of the Lord than great treasure with trouble. You may have heard that proverb. I've heard that used a number of times over the years and seen it on different devotional type objects. Better is a little with the fear of the Lord than great treasure with trouble. And again, that word treasure is like the storehouse. It's like you've got all you want, or all you should want. You're blessed immeasurably, but you know what? Having a little, and the word does mean little right there. There's no secret to that Hebrew word. It's just a little bit, a few if you're counting, not very much if you're measuring, just a little bit. But with the fear of the Lord, that's a whole lot better than the storehouse that brings trouble to you. He who is greedy for gain troubles his own house, but he who hates bribes will live. So there's the bribery. We're going to see that several more times as we go through our examples here from Proverbs. Greedy for gain troubles his own house. The person who always wants more, who is, well, we would use the word covetous today. Um, he's greedy for gain. The word gain there sounds pretty innocuous, but what it means is literally plunder, often associated with violence, to gain that way. You can gain, and it's not necessarily bad, but the word right there is bad. Plundering, even to the point of being violent, and it pays. You pay a price in your own house. He who hates bribes will live. Somebody says, "Well, let me give a little money under the table here, and you do something that will benefit me. Not necessarily righteous, but I'm going to give you this money. You do this, it'll be my benefit, and I'll remember you did this, and you'll have the bribe." A lot of that talked about in the book of Proverbs. But if you hate that, if you say bribery is wrong, bribery is dishonest. Bribery means bearing false witness against my neighbor. Bribery means lying. Bribery means doing something that I shouldn't do because you've given me something that I think is gain. I hate that. I'm not going to do it because God hates it. Chapter 17. And here we get to where the commentators just don't agree. We'll talk about that. A present is a precious stone in the eyes of its possessor. Wherever he turns, he prospers. You can take that verse face value, or you can take that verse as satire. Okay? The present or the gift is a precious stone in the eyes of the possessor. Is it possible to give someone a gift, to give them a present, and to do it with godly motivation for good purposes and good to come from it? Yes, it is. And if you do that, you'll be blessed by it. People will know that. People will respect you. And especially if we're talking about maybe doing something for those who are in need. That's a good thing. And you can prosper. The other way that it's interpreted, depending on how you turn these Hebrew words and possible meanings, is that this gift or this present is given as a form of bribery. And it's a satirical statement. Oh, yeah, it's like a precious stone in the eyes of the possessor. The person can't wait to have that gift, do what you want them to do, and wherever a person goes that does that, they're going to prosper. It's written with a tongue-in-cheek, and depends on how those words are translated. Either one has a valid meaning, doesn't it? Whichever way we understand that, both those are true. A man devoid of understanding shakes hands in a pledge. There's that being a surety for somebody else, and becomes surety for his friend. So that's mincing no words, isn't it? Because Solomon says, if you go out there and you shake hands to cover somebody else's debt, you just don't have understanding. You're not thinking like you should be. And of course, back in those days, a little bit about the history of it, the Jews, it wasn't even supposed to exist according to the law of Moses. So if they were out there taking advantage of people and charging interest and all these things, they were wrong in the first place. But where it probably came from, historically, we believe, is when the Jewish nation started interacting with other nations, and traders would come through, and different cultures and customs would come around, and of course strangers were glad to loan money for good interest. And sometimes maybe a Jewish person could get indebted to somebody who wasn't a Jew, who was a stranger, an outsider, and become in servitude to them. So that's where probably some of the dangers of being a surety or a pledge came from. A wicked man accepts a bribe behind the back to pervert the ways of justice. There's that word bribe again, several other times if we get to them. Bribery is something God hates, because it means that justice does not get done, and God wants justice. Done justice the right way. And bribery is, well, the very nature of bribery is to keep justice from being done, to get my way, whether I'm right or not. That's why we slip some money under the table to somebody, so that we shouldn't get the results, we shouldn't get the product, we shouldn't get the testimony that we get, but we do, simply because we paid them off. All right, we'll finish chapter 18, then I'm going to pause for a minute for comments. Not that we're going to get done, but I still want to give you some time to talk. The rich man's wealth is his strong city and like a high wall in his own esteem. Okay? Again, two ways to interpret this, and folks have done it both ways. And generally, the translation will reflect which way they believe it's trying to say. The rich man's wealth is his strong city. Did we already read earlier that that's possible? You know, riches can protect us. The strong man can be blessed by that. Nothing wrong with that. Or this could be the rich man who has forgotten to put his trust in God and rely on him. And his idea of protection is, I can buy protection. I can get enough wealth that I don't have to worry about anything. You remember a guy that built bigger barns, more barns, bigger barns, filled them up, and then said to his own heart, you've got much goods laid up for many years, eat, drink, and be merry. Okay? Well, that could be the idea. And a high wall in his own esteem. And that word esteem there is translated, I don't know if I wrote it down or not, it's translated a very negative word. Does anybody have a different word there in a different translation? His own imagination. Okay. You see, that's the negative connotation of this verse. And again, either way gives us a message, doesn't it? Either way states a true principle. And this may be the negative. It may be the, you know, he's thinking his riches will be a refuge, a rock of protection, when it really isn't. It's just in his imagination, this translation John read there says. A man's gift makes room for him and brings him before great men. That's what gifts can do. That could be taken as just an observation, a fact of life. It generally does. You know, if you have riches, you probably get to meet people. You'll be in situations in this life that the rest of us common people just won't be in. Or it could mean that presence before great men is done as sort of a bribe to influence the way things are going to turn out, to get some favor that you otherwise wouldn't get. You're bribing these great men to have whatever it is you're desiring. The poor man uses entreaties, but the rich answers roughly. The poor man begs, the poor man implores. That's all he can do. That's the only avenue that he has. But the rich man answers roughly, perhaps to everybody, or perhaps the idea is to the poor man who makes entreaties. The rich man says, well, you know, what do you mean to me? I don't really care what your situation is, or, you know, any feeling obligation to let it go. And again, you kind of think about maybe the rich fool there in Luke chapter 12. Okay, I said I was going to stop, so let me pause there. Any comments on the verses or the principles in general here so far? Yes. That's a good summary, since we've got 5 minutes left. That's a real good summary. Sister June says that she contemplates here these principles, and people like Solomon and other men who were rich, and then also Jesus, who was so poor he had no place to lay his head. You know, he depended on the hospitality of others, as far as we can tell in his ministry. Very rich or very poor, but as we read these things, it's not about either one. It doesn't matter where you are on either extreme or in between. What matters is how you come about having what you have and how you use it. And that's a really good summary for this. As far as money, possessions, stuff that we have. It's how we came to have it in an honest way with integrity, and then how we use it with integrity and with generosity. So very, very good summation. Since we're probably not going to get to the rest of these, that summarizes about all the Proverbs that we could read. Any other comments? Larry? Well, I'm not sure that the people who study it are sure about that in their opinions. Um, mhm. I think if we read this, if we interpret this in a positive sense, and like I say, they do it both ways. If we interpret this in a positive sense, I would understand it to be the one who gives gifts, because it's such a blessing to the person to whom he gives the gift. I think of it as the one who gives it prospering. God will prosper you because you are generous to others. And that's a valid principle. Hmm. Right. And it could be totally legitimate opportunities, could that it opens up to be it before great men. You know, if a person has an opportunity to do something for the cause of Christ, I don't maybe to pass a law or something, or to be a judge, a godly something like that, and they're into that get into that situation to do good, that would be a good thing. Maybe that would be one of the ideas here, if it is a positive connotation. Hmm. Right. Yeah, they're saying if it's positive, it's giving brings blessings. And that's a valid Bible principle. Giving brings blessings from God. In this case, the blessing of being able to to do good, to do more good, and there's nothing wrong with that. Yes, sir. Okay. Brother Warren points out that we need to remind ourselves, living in the country that we do, that you know it's been said before. During getting ready for contribution on Sunday, things like that, we're so blessed. And compared to the rest of the world, there's very few of us who can't say we're rich compared to the rest of the world. Because all you have to do is go visit some of the rest of the world to see that. And so we need to be sure we don't put ourselves in a category of, being poor because we don't have as much as everybody in America does, the top 1% or something. But worldwide, we're in the upper percentages of having, and there's a sense in which anybody in America pretty much is rich in that sense. Well, we have a lot of good proverbs on money we didn't get to. I'm going to reflect between now and next Wednesday night if we need to take another week and talk about those. I think maybe we do. Appreciate your comments, your questions, and your attention.